Hi, I'm Joe.
And I'm Andy, and we're here from Heart of the Game.
Today we are here with our last installment of our Budget Commander series, and today we're going to be talking about Colorless and lands.
Now, this isn't the end-all be-all of Commander budget cards. This is just some cards that we think should be utilized more.
We're going to start off with our $1 or less cards that we think more people should be playing in their Commander decks. We're going to start with an honorable mention. Basic lands.
Now, basic lands, people really aren't using enough because they like to have the ability to have multiple types of mana come out of each land or have a lot of utility lands, but they can easily get hosed by cards like Blood Moon and Back to Basics.
Not to mention, if you have someone at your table that's playing things like Ruination, you know, the same type of person that would play Blood Moon, you don't want to lose all of your mana. On the other hand, you don't want to only play basics because you do want to have some amount of color fixing that isn't just hoping that you draw the right cards.
Our first $1 or less card is going to be a generalization of bounce lands. Now, these cards allow you to reuse enter the battlefield effects on your lands, such as a Bajuka Bog, and they can basically be 2 cards drawn.
Yeah, the thing is, when you draw a bounce land off the top of your library and then you play it, because you're going to bounce another land back to your hand, it's effectively like you've drawn 2 lands, and it helps you guarantee your next land drop.
Plus, if you have things that untap your lands on like a creature effect, this can be ramping you even harder.
Yeah, and if you have any landfall triggers, you'll be able to just repeatedly play the bounce land and return the bounce land to your hand with its own effect to consistently hit those landfall triggers like Avenger of Zendikar or Obnixilis or any of those effects that you really want to abuse. Our next $1 or less card is Commander Sphere. Commander Sphere is really powerful because you're going to be able to play it early to ramp and fix your colors, but late game you'll be able to crack it to draw a card.
Yeah, because late game I always find it like super bad to be drawing your card for turn and it's a land or it's a mana rock, because they don't do much when you're in the late game, but you can just play this and sacrifice it to draw a card.
Yeah, and if it's tapped after your turn and then someone decides they're going to cast a Shatterstorm where it's going to destroy all the artifacts on the table, you can sacrifice it to draw a card in response so you don't lose out on that value.
Our third card today is Nihil Spellbomb. Now, this card is so good because you get to hose out one person's graveyard, because there's usually not a ton of graveyards at the table that you need to answer, and you don't lose a card by doing it. You just get to pay 1 mana to draw a card when you activate it.
Yeah, and the fact that it's a 1-drop means that you can just play it on turn 1 to leave a constant threat out to whoever wants to play with their graveyard, that you can get rid of it at any point during the game and you'll still be able to draw a card. And because it's also split up between the triggered ability and the casting cost, you can split it amongst multiple turns, which is something most people overlook. Our next card is Mimikvat. Mimikvat is incredibly useful in Commander, and I very rarely see it for whatever reason. It's super great because it's going to allow you to have some amount of graveyard hate while also being able to make some pretty sweet tokens.
Yeah, these tokens can be on enter the battlefield effects for creatures, so like a Reclamation Sage or a Wood Elf, so that every turn you're going to get a land into play or destroy an artifact or enchantment.
Plus, if you do have some sort of enters the battlefield effect, you will be able to, if you have, let's say, a Seedborn Muse or an Unwinding Clock, you'll be able to use Mimikvat on every player's turn, which will get you insurmountable card advantage.
Our last set of cards, once again, is going to be the 1-mana cycling lands. Now, these are really good because it's the same idea that we had earlier with Commander Sphere, where late game when you draw mana, it feels kind of bad. But now, instead of that, I can just cycle it away to draw a card.
Yeah, not to mention, it also cycles at instant speed because you maybe want to hold up the threat of having, let's say, counter magic, but you have a Lonely Sandbar in hand, so you just cycle it at the end of the turn before it gets back to your turn.
Plus, these cards in a deck like Gitrog just draws you 2 cards. And I don't know, 1 mana for 2 cards feels great.
Yeah, and it pairs phenomenally with Life from the Loam. So if I have the ability to play 1 or 2 lands a turn, and I cast a Life from the Loam, getting back a cycling land, a strip mine, and an Evolving Wilds, I'll be able to play the 2 lands that I want to, and then I'll be able to dredge 3 at instant speed for 1 mana. So now we're going to move to our $5 or less cards that we think more people should be playing in their commander decks. Our first card is Bajuka Bog. Now this enters the battlefield effect on this land is pretty dang good. I can't really think of anything else that does what Bajuka Bog does as efficiently as Bajuka Bog.
Now, when you get to tutor your library for a land and put it into play, it's really powerful. So cards like Crop Rotation and Hour of Promise become that much better.
Yeah, and it feels really good when you have a Crop Rotation. When your opponent casts something like an Underworld Breach or a Yawgmoth's Will, to be able to, at instant speed, get that enters the battlefield effect from your Bajuka Bog, because Bajuka Bog is that powerful.
Our next card is Alchemist Refuge. Now, this card takes up the utility land slot because it doesn't produce a color of mana, but being able to play all of your stuff at instant speed is very, very powerful.
Yeah, I cannot tell you the number of times that Andy has played an Alchemist Refuge to just hold up all of his mana to interact on everyone else's turn, and then if he doesn't interact, he just activates the Refuge and plays a Planeswalker at instant speed, untaps with it, and then he basically didn't have to put a threat out while not having interaction held up.
And it ends up synergizing super well with cards like Wilderness Reclamation and Seedborn Muse, because that instant speed allows you to play something every turn with Seedborn Muse.
Our next card is Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp's incredibly powerful because you're going to be able to abuse the dies trigger to draw 2 cards, and the fact that it gives a minus to your toughness on your creature means you're going to get that much easier.
Yeah, it synergizes well with cards like Avenger of Zendikar because you can just play Avenger, get all of those tokens, and then clamp all of them away and draw that many cards times 2.
Not to mention, this card is so powerful that it got banned in Modern and in Legacy because it synergized so well with elves. Like, you can just tap a Llanowar elf to equip the clamp to that Llanowar elf to then let it die and draw 2 cards.
Plus, it can be used as a protection spell as well, because if I equip the Skull Clamp to, say, an Oracle of Moldiah, your opponent is going to think twice about whether or not they want to actually kill that creature.
In addition, Skull Clamp's really good when you have your commander in play, because they made that rules change pretty recently about getting dies triggers when your commander goes back to the command zone. So if I equip my commander with a Skull Clamp and my opponent has been tapped out, and then they untap and they've got something like a Walk the Plank in their hand, they realistically don't want to kill your commander with that card that doesn't exile, because they don't want you getting that draw 2 and still having access to your commander.
Our next card is Sunforger. Now, this card is so powerful because you get to play all of the instants in your deck that cost 4 mana or less, basically as though they were in your hand.
Yeah, you're basically going to be paying 5 mana instead of 4 mana or less for these cards, because you're going to have to pay that equip cost and then that unequip cost. But when you're searching through your library to do it, it feels really good. And you can also divide it amongst multiple turns, so it doesn't really matter that much.
Usually I like using this in kind of an aggro deck that's going to sit there and be attacking at my opponents, and then I can unequip it and go grab a Boros Charm and save my field from a board wipe.
Yeah, I've played it in a couple of my decks. My favorite types of cards to grab are like Teferi's Protection, Boros Charm, Ghostway, Eerie Interlude. Just sort of protect my stuff from a board wipe.
Plus also, you're always going to be using Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile sort of spells in a deck that you have Sunforger in, so you can just remove out troublesome creatures.
Yeah, and if your opponent is casting something like a Torment of Hailfire to win the game, you can also grab a Counterflux or a Dovin's Veto if you're in blue from your deck by unattaching that Sunforger. Our last card today is Duplicant. Duplicant is incredibly useful because not every color has access to exile removal. Except Duplicant is colorless, so every color does have access to exile removal.
And it's on an enter the battlefield effect, so cards like Restoration Angel and Felidar Guardian let you get another exile effect with it.
Not to mention, the fact that it's a 2/4 is actually really handy because you're going to be able to search it up with an Imperial Recruiter, or you can get it back with a Revel Arc.
And when it's on the field, it's not even 2 power because it's going to take on the power and toughness of the creature it exiled.
Not to mention, because it's a 6-drop, it's really, really nice if you're playing Birthing Pod. I know all of my Birthing Pod decks, I struggle to find a 6-drop other than Duplicant that I feel comfortable sacrificing to the Birthing Pod to go get something like an Elish Norn or an Avenger of Zendikar. And Duplicant is really nice to pod into and out of because it is an enters the battlefield effect, so you'll always get that value out of it.
So those were some pretty powerful budget cards that were colorless and lands.
Yeah, I think I should probably play a few more of these, especially basic lands, because a lot of these have a lot more utility than people even realize.
Whether it's doing things at instant speed or just exiling things without needing a color, all of them are really good.
If you missed any of our previous episodes, you can find them here.
And if you have yet to subscribe to us, go ahead and click right here.
Thanks for watching.